All right, so I want to add a little bit of further context. You know, what better way to follow context with more context? And in particular to focus on imprisonment in Wales. So there's just 2 slides on this, and then we'll start to think a little bit more about the report and some of its findings. So why produce a report like this? Why should we focus on Wales? We know, and Richard's already talked about the England and Wales system. Why focus on Wales as a unique space? Well, there's already a context to this as we stand or sit here today. So in January of this year, the Welsh Affairs Committee launched its 2nd inquiry within 4 years on imprisonment in Wales. That, first and foremost, gives us a way in to think about these kinds of questions. And when anybody submitting evidence to that attempts to do so, they will come up against the lack of data that we're looking to try and address here. The second point, as Julie and Richard have already mentioned, is the Commission on Justice in Wales. And that is the main thrust behind this work. In particular, to offer a response to question 3, and you can see it there, but I will read it out very quickly anyway. So, what problems face people who work within the justice system in Wales, including policing, prosecution, courts, prisons and probation, and the people who are affected by it? Now, this report provides a wealth of evidence within the context of imprisonment about the problems that face people within the system and those who are, of course, affected by it. And not only from this report, but of course from all of the other debates, we really do look forward to seeing the evidence submissions that go into the Commission, particularly from the Ministry of Justice, in response to what we've actually found today. We're kind of interested in what they would have to say to that. Secondly, there is a lack of research on imprisonment in Wales. That's been well established by Richard. And the litmus test is this. Take this report out of this equation, go onto Google and try and find out how many Welsh people are in prison. You may go to the Ministry of Justice website, you won't find it there. I know, you'll go to the Welsh Government website, you won't find it there. You might go to the Howard League's website, they produce lots of information, you won't find it there. Prison Reform Trust, won't find it there. Wales Governance Centre, prior to this morning, you wouldn't find it there. The Welsh Centre for Crime and Social, you get the picture. You won't find it anywhere. So there's a real gap, and we think this report is important in terms of drawing a line into the sand and actually putting this information out there. The difficulties in obtaining information, again, is another major hurdle. Now, what's interesting here is that the Ministry of Justice have actually acknowledged the need to make Welsh-only data more freely available. Now, that is a commitment up until now that they've actually failed to deliver upon. They've actually failed to do anything about that, but we think this report should really, add pressure to them, further convince them to make this information more freely available because of some of the problems that we think we can highlight here. So we think there's a need for Welsh data, and I'm going to give you some examples where and why. Well, this is all under this why do this? What is the point? What is the point of you picking up a copy, although you'll have a job now, but what is the point of you picking up a copy? They are available on eBay, but if you pick up a copy and read it, what's the point in reading it? Well, we hope to kind of show why. So there are 2 examples I'm going to discuss, but first and foremost, we think that HMP Bedouin, the decision to build HMP Bedouin in 2013 was our first real stab at this, where we used data to show and to make, I think, develop a more critically informed debate over that prison. Now, secondly, last year on the 22nd of March, the Ministry of Justice announced its intention to build another prison in Wales at a site in Baglan in Port Talbot. Again, on the day that announcement came out, we on the Wales Governance Centre, and you log on, it's actually referenced in the report, and you will see our announcement that day, which actually showed that the prison would lead to a surplus of places. You then maybe heard of that as the Wales becoming the Botany Bay of Europe, etc., etc. Okay, so that was a Howard League's line, not ours. But we held back from the Botany Bay argument. So I want to discuss 2 things before I go on to. I keep saying I'm going to discuss 2 things and then move on to 2 more things. Okay, we will get there, I promise. It may go dark though. So first and foremost, I want to look at the availability of Welsh data. Okay, so what you can't see there. Okay, and you're not really meant to. Okay, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. Okay, what you can't see there is a one-piece evidence submission from the Older People's Commissioner for Wales to the Justice Committee's current inquiry on prisons in 2022. Okay, now the nature of what the Older People's Commission is saying is not necessarily important, but if you log on and see that, okay, you will actually see that there is no Welsh data in there. There is no data on how many Welsh people, for example, or how many people over a certain age are held in Welsh prisons, or Welsh people by age. Now, the reason I use this as an example is we don't have that information. There is so much information, even though we go out there and we collect this information regularly and we think we're on top of it, there are so many different areas here that we don't have this information, and it's not freely and openly available. Now, we've since put in 6 requests to get this information, and they're currently dealing with it. I think, we'll see what we get back from that. But that's an example where there's a clear debate here about policy, but there's no information to actually use and include, even for a body like the Older People's Commissioner for Wales. That was HMPPS, summing up. Alan Cairns just came in and just it's fair enough. So there's the first thing, availability. I come back to that Google point. It's not available, and we think that's to the detriment of debates, important debates about older people in prison. The fastest growing group of people in prison, older people in prison, but we don't have that information. Secondly, is that we think that Welsh-only information, even when it is available, is not actually being analysed. Now, what you can't see here or what you can just see is a screenshot of the evidence of Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Services in Wales to a National Assembly committee, the Health and Social Care and Sport Committee's ongoing inquiry on suicide prevention. Now, what you would be able to see if this was a little bit larger is that down here is some data. But that isn't data on Welsh prisons. That's data on the number of self-harm incidents in England and Wales. Think about that. This is a National Assembly committee looking at suicide prevention in Wales, and the members of that committee have been given evidence about England and Wales. Now, that's not to say they're not interested in what happens in England, or they don't care about the welfare of prisoners in England. I mean, we know that 39% of Welsh people in prison are in England. But wouldn't it have been useful, wouldn't it have been helpful to have a more critically informed debate if that information on Wales could have actually been provided there? Now, the key is that it's available. It is available via the Google route. You can go and find it after this event. I know you will rush to do so in 5 minutes. So one, data isn't always available. 2, even when it is, people aren't actually analysing that information and taking it seriously. And I think that's a really, really telling example. It's my understanding that they're going to be given oral evidence, I think, on Thursday. Well, I think some of the information contained within this report today should feature as part of that hearing or that evidence session. So, look, the report itself, I said we'd get there eventually. There's 6 chapters, and I'm going to focus mainly on safety, male prisoners, female prisoners, children in prison, and we're going to touch upon and end with the Welsh language. So, and I've got some, I mean, if anyone's flicked through the document, you'll see that there are so many different pieces of information here. The big dread is that somebody asks me about a particular bullet point in page 15, and you could say anything, and there's so much data in there. So I've got a few notes to try and help us guide us through. Now, one of the taglines from the report, and this follows on from HM Chief Inspector of Prisons evidence, Peter Clark's evidence to the Welsh Affairs Committee last week, is that Welsh prisons are performing worse than those in England. Now, there's a real problem with statements such as this. It is not easy to compare prisons in Wales with prisons in England. They are not like for like. We can't actually necessarily make those comparisons as openly and as sweeping as maybe we have done previously, or indeed as Peter Clark did last week, although he did actually say this isn't an easy comparison to make. We don't have any women's prisons, we don't have Category A prisons. It's not a like for like. But on key measures of performance, Welsh prisons are not performing as well as those in England. And that is borne out by some of the findings within this report. So first and foremost, the report details the number of recommendations that have not been achieved across all prisons in Wales, the worst being HMP Swansea. The report was released in January of this year. So of a total of 212 recommendations, only 36% had actually been fully achieved. In total, 43% were not achieved at all, not even partially achieved. So when recommendations are made on improvements, we're actually seeing that these aren't actually been achieved, which poses all kinds of questions about political accountability. Who is it that is actually responding to these and ensuring that these recommendations are implemented? Now, in terms of the actual information as well, look, we can move on to assaults on staff. Oh, lovely. So, assaults on staff reached their highest level in 2017 in Welsh prisons. On average, a member of prison staff was assaulted every single day in Welsh prisons last year. Every single day, someone on average was assaulted in Welsh prisons. Not only were assaults on staff that reached their highest level, prisoner-on-prisoner assaults also reached their highest level in 2017. It had increased by 156% since 2010. So we've seen a major rise in the number of prisoner-on-prisoner assaults in Wales since 2010. It's not actually on there, but the information is included within the report. We've also seen across England and Wales a rise in the number of prison disturbances. Well, interestingly, or perhaps worryingly, maybe more accurate, there were more prison disturbances at HMP Park in Bridgend in 2016 and 2017 than any other prison in England and Wales. Now, you might think, well, yeah, of course, Park's one of the biggest prisons in England and Wales. But in 2016, if you take it as a proportion of the number of people in that prison, Park still had the highest rate. That dropped in 2017. I think HMP Aylesbury was the next after Park. Okay, so we had the highest number of disturbances in a Welsh prison, even when you factor in population. Deaths in custody across England and Wales, there are 122 in 2016. There were 7 in Wales. Now, the numbers dropped last year, and they dropped in Wales too. There was, I say just, but there was just 1 last year. Of course, one too many. However, on average, somebody takes their own life in a Welsh prison every 4 months. That's what we've seen since 2010. Every 4 months. Not in England and Wales, in Wales. And that brings me on to the last point, and I have a graph to help me here, and that's self-harm incidents. Since 2010, the number of self-harm incidents in Wales have increased by 358%. Now, the number of people in prison in Wales has increased in South Wales, but Bedouin is not included in this, so we can actually make some comparisons. Now, the number of people in Welsh prisons has increased by 23% during this period of time. So we've gone up by 23%, but of course the number of self-harm incidences have increased at a much higher rate. And it's worth bearing in mind that you can see here that there is some drop-off. Even when the population is increasing, there is a drop-off. So we can't necessarily attribute this to population because, of course, we know it's been going up steadily, but we've obviously seen it come down as the population's gone up. I mean, it's just startling. 5 incidents of self-harm every day in Welsh prisons. Not England and Wales, in Wales. 5 a day. That's something we associate with something very, very different. You're 5 a day. Well, that puts it into some kind of context. So that's with safety in Welsh prisons. Now I want to move on to the male prisoner state. I've got receptions there. There's not a huge amount to say there, although the report will guide you through. HMP Cardiff has the most receptions, i.e. it sees the most receptions from court from any other prison in Wales. A major theme to come out of this report, and has been discussed today in the media, particularly in North Wales with HMP Bedouin, is the number of Welsh prisoners who are in England. I mentioned earlier, I'm not going anywhere, I promise. I mentioned earlier that 39% of all Welsh people in prison are in England. Now, what that actually, or why that's significant is because of, you see the point underneath, is distances. Distances from home is recognised as a major impediment to the maintenance of family contact and also for through-the-gate support services. There's a huge amount of research, and you'll see this actually covered in the report. It's not for me to go through in any depth now, but there's a huge amount of research on which demonstrates why that's a problem. So even with the construction of HMP Bedouin, which we know is still not up to full capacity, we still see a large number of prisoners from Wales held in institutions in England, and I'm going to come on to the reverse in a minute. Even with the introduction of resettlement prisons in 2013 and 2014, the aim of resettlement prisons was to ensure that prisoners would be held as close to home as possible, particularly prior to their release. Now, it is worth bearing in mind here that prisoners in England isn't necessarily always a right and perfect measure. Now, the point I'm getting at there is that if you're a prisoner from South Wales, it's possibly, I think most definitely, better for you in terms of distance to be held in Bristol than it would be to be held in HMP Bedwyn in North Wales. But the figures from March show that more than a quarter of HMP Bedwyn's population, Welsh population, are from South Wales. There were 20 prisoners with an address in Cardiff held in Bedwyn at the end of March. We will, of course, have to watch and wait and see what happens to those numbers. So even within distances, there's a caveat. There is a caveat that this idea of holding them in Wales doesn't necessarily mean that they're as close to home as they could be, and I think that shouldn't be lost in this debate. The report also contains findings on release, about the releases from prisons. I have actually put in a request for information on where Welsh people are released from, but the MOJ instructed me that that was a request too big to complete. Perhaps we can get that information by other means. Look, across every single week, on average, in 2017, 83 people are released from Welsh prisons every single week. On average, 6 people a day are released from HMP Cardiff. So when we talk about devolved services, as Richard spoke about at the start, 6 people a day are coming out, demanding services rightfully from local government. It's a major issue that we think needs to be looked at. Now, I want to kind of, before moving on to the next slide, end on this point, and that's English prisoners from Wales. Very often in Wales, we focus on Welsh prisoners in England, but it's really interesting and I think important to think about how we see the trend the other way. I always picture this situation on the M4, where we actually have we have the GeoAmy vans going towards England, and then on the other way we have English prisoners coming into Wales. The debate largely focuses on Bedwyn, but you can also see over the years, this is just for 2017, but the number of prisoners held from England held in prisons in South Wales has also increased. So it's an incredibly important trend. There were 1,250 prisoners from England held in Wales in December of 2017. The figures for March, they've gone up again, of course, because as Bedwyn starts to climb and climb and climb. Okay, so that's another really important issue that we need to be thinking about here. What about English prisoners who are held in Wales as well? Excuse me, and the report covers that. Now, female prisoners, this is a subject which I know is very much close to Julie's heart, and we've done some work on this in the past. And it's possibly something that everybody, I would suspect, even if they wouldn't claim to be particularly informed about imprisonment in Wales, most people will know that there is no women's prison in Wales, and all Welsh women will be sent to prisons in England. Now, key within that is that not that they're just held in Eastwood Park or HMP style, is that they are held in all of the women's prisons in England. 26% of Welsh women in prison are dispersed across 10 different prisons in England, women's prisons in England. 74% are held at Eastwood Park and Style together, but the remaining 26% are spread right across the estate, and there's a table in the report that shows you which institutions that they're in. There are other issues which the report deals with as well. For example, you have sentence length. Julie's already touched upon this. 74%, so 3/4 of all Welsh women sentenced to immediate custody in 2016 were there for periods of less than 6 months. 3 in 4 women in prison are there for less than 6 months. So again, that is a major problem about whether we should be using that. Incidentally, the figure in England and Wales as a whole was 62%. So it's higher in Wales. The use of short-term imprisonment for women in Wales is higher than it is for England and Wales. Why? That's a question to be addressed by of course, those responsible. Offence type is also very interesting. 86% of women sentenced to immediate custody in 2016 were there for non-violent offences. 86% for a non-violent offence. And that relates to the sentence lengths that we see. So again, there's some evidence here on a Welsh level to address this problem that we have for quite a while actually been discussing. This ties into, of course, the Corston review. We talk about it, how great it was in terms of setting the scene and really establishing the evidence base, but we still talk about it as a report. It's never actually been delivered unfortunately. Now, we know, again, research shows, and the report goes through this, that that women disproportionately experience histories and have histories of abuse. Mothers in prison, we deal with that in the report, the issues that mothers in prison face, what impact that has on children. We know it's a very different relationship when men go to prison and what happens with children. It is also worth bearing in mind that the mother and baby unit at Eastwood Park remains closed. That unit has been closed for well over a year now. And I think the report, it's over 100 miles away, the nearest mother and baby unit. Now bearing in mind, if you live in Swansea, Eastwood Park in Gloucester is not particularly close as it is. Being spun off another 100 miles further away is, of course, is a major issue. Also within the report, I provided a focus on what we call the FP, or the RP, should I say, the Welsh Female Resettlement Prisons, which are a style in Eastwood Park. There's numbers falling there. I don't know what, that's got nothing to do with the numbers on there. I think it's got something to do with the screen. But the figures for 2017 and 16, you can see 16 was higher than 17. Incidentally, at Eastwood Park, which has a population, operational capacity of about 440, in 2016, 440 people in there, as a rule. There were more self-harm incidents in that prison than all of the prisons in South Wales combined. 440 people are held in that prison. It's a staggering level of a rate of self-harm, and that is where the most Welsh women will end up. Roughly around about 147 at any one time from Wales are in Eastwood Park. Children in prison is also covered in the report. Now this is a bit of a good news story in many ways, but problems persist. The graph you see here is the number of children, the number of Welsh children who are in custody, who are in prison. And you can see how that's actually decreased 69% during that period. Now that's consistent across England and Wales, but it's still something that we certainly should celebrate. We're actually down to 30 at the end of March. The numbers have come to 30, but there's an ebb and a flow between those numbers. However, there are also issues raised within the report that we think need to be addressed on a Welsh level. So, first and foremost, 45% of all Welsh children in 2017 were held in English establishments, English institutions. So 45% of all Welsh children in custody were in England. It's about 47% at the end of March. So it's a staggeringly high number of children who are held in institutions outside of Wales. The debate on adults is, of course, significant, but for children, arguably, it takes on more salience. Significantly, we also see a rise in the number of English children who are held in Wales. In particular, the decision to re-roll Ashfield in Bristol and to extend the court catchment area of HMP Park has resulted in an increase in the number of children from England who are being held in HMP Park in South Wales. Again, that's an issue that we in Wales should be thinking about, and how services are provided to those children. Much like with adults, the distances are a major impediment to family contact. Now, family contact for an adult is one thing. Family contact for a child arguably takes on an even greater significance. This is a huge problem. There's a couple of quotes in there. Or there's a reference to a report where there's a couple of quotes about English children who were, their astonishment at being told that they were being sent to a different country when being held in prison. It's a tough read, those quotes. So distance is a major issue, something we need to think about, which ties into this last point in particular. Feelings of isolation, feelings of loneliness when you're held not only in an institution centred upon deprivation of liberty and all other kinds of deprivation, but that you're many miles away from home, many miles away from family or those agencies who are actually trying to help you with your release. Now, following on from that, and this is the final section of the report I want to discuss, is Welsh language. Now, there's a chapter at the end on this, but the chapter on children deals with this quite specifically, and it leads on for those issues of isolation and loneliness. And in particular, the work of Caroline Hughes and Yola Maddock-Jones at Glyndŵr University in Wrexham have actually looked at this and explored this, and how being held in an unfamiliar linguistic environment can add to that sense of isolation and loneliness and estrangement that children feel in custody. Again, it's an issue which never really goes away, but is something which is dealt with in the report. Now, HMIP have long found a number of problems, but we have, within the most recent inspection, seen some improvements. Certain strategies in place, better attempts to promote the Welsh language. However, the debate essentially continues from one set of reports to the next. There's an ebb and a flow. It improves, then it goes back, it improves, then it goes back. HMP Berwyn, a report by the Welsh Language Commissioner into its recruitment of staff raised concerns, but it's absolutely worth pointing out Berwyn is in its early days. And I think that we need to wait and see what happens with the prison when it reaches full operational capacity. Still only half full, even though it's more than a year on since it opened. And it's worth, anyone's interested in particularly the Welsh language angle, there was evidence by the Prison Probation Ombudsman to the Welsh Affairs Committee last week, discussed a complaint that was made by a prisoner at HMP Gartree in Leicestershire about a lack of material in the prison library. So there's a huge amount covered there, and I'm just going to make these 4 conclusions and then collapse, I don't know, sit down and drink some tea. So one, there is a compelling case and there is compelling evidence here to support the claim that made by HMCIP that prisons in Wales are performing worse than those in England. We know it's not easy to make those comparisons, but there is evidence to suggest that things are bad in England, without question, but they're worse in Wales at a completely different rate. Self-harm has increased in England, but it's increased at a much higher rate in Wales, and those findings support the claims that are being made by HMCIP. The findings presented here also highlight the need to gather and analyse Welsh-only data. We think there's a really strong argument for that, and we hope that the Ministry of Justice can make this information more freely available. I mean, I'm happy to keep using the Freedom of Information Act, that's fine. It's served us well. But there's a much easier way to do this so that people can access this information far more freely. And we hope that those conversations begin to take place for the people who do it my FOI's sake more than anyone. Thirdly, the report should be used, as I've already mentioned, to make this information more freely available. And fourthly, we think that the report raises some important questions about political accountability for these issues in Wales. With prisoner healthcare devolved, those figures I raise about self-harm raise very, very important questions for not only for people in Westminster, but also those who sit over there as well. And we think that the many findings in this report will hopefully kickstart that debate alongside the work of the Commission on Justice in Wales. Okay, thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, fire away.